Hey, it's Mark here, and welcome to the next edition of the Employee Survival Guide, where I tell you, as always, what your employer does definitely not want you to know about, and a lot more.
I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you are trying to navigate a brand new company policy.
Right, which happens all the time.
Exactly. So you go to human resources, which is, exactly where you're supposed to go when you need an accommodation.
Yeah, you follow the rules.
Right. And you submit a standard, albeit highly sensitive, request for a religious and medical exemption. So you fill out the required forms, you follow the chain of command, and you just wait.
And
then almost immediately after you submit that paperwork, the ground completely falls out from under you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You don't get a standard approval. You don't even get a routine denial. Instead, you suddenly find your security badge deactivated.
You're just locked out.
Locked out of the building. And then you find yourself the subject of a severe, formal disciplinary investigation.
That's a massive escalation.
It gets worse. Here is the truly wild part. The investigation isn't even about your exemption request. It's about a minor, previously unmentioned volunteer event that happened 4 whole months ago.
Wait, 4 months prior?
4 months. So how would you react? How would you feel if pulling the standard HR fire alarm resulted in the company allegedly turning the fire hoses directly on you? Welcome to another episode of the Employee Survival Guide, produced by employment attorney Mark Carey.
It is a really profound scenario to put yourself in.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for the individuals we're analyzing today, it is not just a hypothetical thought experiment.
No, it's not.
Right. It's the very real, very high stakes factual allegation sitting at the absolute center of an intense federal legal battle.
So our mission today is to explore this really complex, multi-layered, and frankly shocking legal dispute between 2 former long-term employees and their former employer, which is the global toy manufacturing giant, Hasbro. We're
going to unpack the factual allegations of religious discrimination. We'll scrutinize the alleged retaliation regarding a corporate COVID-19 vaccine mandate. And we're going to examine how a massive multinational corporation defends itself against these types of severe claims.
And then finally, we'll dissect a really dramatic procedural plot twist from the First Circuit Court of Appeals, a twist that completely revived this lawsuit after it was initially thrown out of court.
Yeah, the appeals ruling is fascinating. And to anchor our discussion, our analysis today is built entirely and exclusively on 3 primary federal court documents.
Right. We always stick to the sources.
Exactly. We are examining the plaintiff's amended complaint, which gives us their specific factual allegations and their timeline. We're analyzing Hasbro's official answer to that complaint, which outlines their corporate defense strategy.
And the third one.
The third is a crucial January 2026 excerpt from the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which dictates exactly how and why this case is actually moving forward today.
Okay, before we get into the timeline, we really have to address the elephant in the room here. This lawsuit inherently involves highly politically charged and deeply personal topics.
Yeah, very much so.
We are going to be discussing COVID-19 corporate vaccine mandates. We'll be discussing intense religious beliefs surrounding abortion, fetal tissue, and bodily autonomy. And we want to state unequivocally and clearly that we are taking absolutely no sides in those broader societal debates.
Right. We are not here to validate or invalidate any scientific assertions, any medical decisions, or any theological beliefs.
Exactly. Our sole job is to act as impartial reporters of the legal record. We are strictly conveying the legal arguments, the legal strategies, and the factual allegations exactly as they are documented in the federal court source material. We're just looking at how federal employment law applies to these explosive allegations, nothing more.
And, in the eyes of the federal court, their task isn't to act as a referee for theology or public health policy either.
Right.
The court's job and our job in analyzing the court's actions is to apply established employment law, specifically Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, to the documented actions of the employer and the employees.
Perfect. So let's set the stage by looking at the individuals at the center of this storm. We have 2 plaintiffs. The first is Natalie Tomaselli. At the time these events kick off, she is a 4-year employee of Hasbro.
Okay, so she's got some tenure.
Right.
Oh.
And the second is Jennifer DeAngelis, who is a 10-year veteran of the company. Both of these women worked in management specifically. They were senior and associate managers in global brand publicity for Hasbro, based out of their Rhode Island operations.
Which is an important distinction to make.
Oh, so?
Well, we're not talking about entry-level new hires who are still figuring out the corporate culture. We are talking about established, integrated professionals who have been successfully navigating the corporate structure, the expectations, and the internal politics of a major global brand for years.
Yeah, that baseline really is a critical piece of context for any employment lawsuit.
Absolutely. When you have long-term managerial employees, there's an extensive paper trail.
Right, performance reviews and such.
It's exactly. Years of performance reviews, established working relationships with supervisors, and a clearly documented baseline of what their quote-unquote normal employment looks like.
So when a discrimination or retaliation claim happens and that established normal suddenly and violently shatters, the specific timeline of events becomes the absolute focal point for a judge or a jury.
They want to know exactly what the catalyst was that changed the relationship.
And the catalyst that shatters that normal here begins in the fall of 2021. This is the period when Hasbro officially institutes a COVID-19 vaccine mandate for its workforce.
Right, along with a lot of other companies at that time.
Yeah. So both Tomaselli and DeAngelis make the decision to seek formal exemptions from this new mandate. They base these requests on what they state are sincerely held religious beliefs, alongside some incredibly severe medical concerns that we will unpack in detail shortly.
Let's start by looking at the specific factual allegations regarding their religious beliefs, because honestly, the actual language they choose to use in their official HR forms is incredibly striking.
It really is. Now, the legal threshold under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is very specific, right?
Yes, it requires an employee to demonstrate a, quote, sincerely held religious belief, unquote, that conflicts with a specific work requirement.
And the courts don't usually argue with the belief itself, do they?
No, the federal courts generally do not question the validity, the plausibility, or the mainstream acceptance of the religious belief. It is not the court's job to determine if a belief is theologically correct.
But they do scrutinize the sincerity.
Exactly. They scrutinize the sincerity of the employee holding that belief. So the specific, intense language the plaintiffs chose to use in their exemption requests is their strategic way of establishing that legal foundation of absolute, unquestionable sincerity right out of the gate.
Okay, let's look at Natalie Tomaselli's filing. According to the amended complaint, she submits her formal exemption request to Human Resources on October 7th, 2021.
And what does she say?
She states on the form that she's been a Christian for 34 years and strictly follows the teachings of the Bible. But she doesn't just stop at a general statement of faith.
Right, she gets specific.
Very specific about how her faith intersects with the mandate. She states, and I am quoting directly from the complaint here, "I believe that no person should be forced or coerced into putting anything into their bodies that they do not willingly consent to. To do this is a sin."
Wow.
Yeah. She further states that those who exercise this type of coercive power will ultimately be judged by the Lord.
So she is intentionally establishing a deeply religious framework for the concept of bodily autonomy.
Exactly.
She is framing the corporate mandate not just as a medical disagreement or a political overreach, which would not be protected by Title VII, but as a direct, literal violation of divine law as she interprets it.
Because a secular philosophical objection to a vaccine doesn't get you Title VII protection.
Right. A sincere religious objection does. She is making sure her objection is planted firmly in the latter category.
And she goes even further into the theological specifics. She specifically objects to the vaccines developed by companies like Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson because, according to her written statement, they were reported to have used fetal cell lines derived from aborted babies during their research and development phases.
That was a very specific objection raised at the time.
Yeah, and she states to Hasbro that she has a sincere religious belief that abortion is a profound sin, going so far as to call it the most heartless and soulless crime one can commit.
That is incredibly strong language for an HR form.
It is. She asserts that it's her spiritual and religious choice not to support, in any way, any industry or activity that engages in abortion for profit, even if that activity is packaged under the guise of scientific or medical research.
And that's a highly specific, well-documented theological stance that became quite prominent in certain religious circles during the initial rollout of the vaccines.
So it anchors her claim.
Exactly. By tying her objection directly to her deeply held pre-existing views on abortion, Tomaselli is anchoring her exemption request to a recognized religious framework. She is making it exceedingly difficult for a corporate HR department to dismiss her request as a mere secular preference or a political statement. She is drawing a hard theological line in the sand.
Okay, then we have Jennifer DeAngelis. She filed her exemption request a couple of weeks earlier on September 23rd, 2021.
And she also identifies as a practicing Christian, right?
Yes, she does. And her language is arguably even more intense and unyielding than Tomaselli's. She states her belief that forcing any substance upon someone without their consent is, quote, equivalent to the sin and crime of rape.
Oh, my.
Yeah. She was pregnant at the time this mandate was rolling out, which is a crucial medical detail we'll explore in a minute. And she expressed deep faith-based and health-based fears about the vaccine's effect on her unborn child.
And she had similar objections about fetal tissue, didn't she?
She did. She similarly objected to the use of aborted human tissue in the testing phases of the vaccines, but she escalated the rhetoric even further, equating the scientific testing to the biblical sin of child sacrifice.
So here again, we see the strategic and deeply personal use of extreme theological language in a corporate document. By invoking concepts as visceral and severe as rape and child sacrifice, DeAngelis is signaling to Hasbro management the absolute uncompromising nature of her religious objection.
She's essentially putting them on notice.
Right. She's saying to force me to take this vaccine to keep my job is to force me to participate in what my religion considers the ultimate evils. Under Title VII, an employer has to tread incredibly carefully when an employee articulates a workplace conflict in such absolute, existential, and theological terms.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. Requiring a religious exemption in the workplace is legally supposed to be like pulling a fire alarm, right? It alerts the company that you have a specific protected type of conflict and you need a specific protected type of help.
It's a flare going up saying, my legal rights are currently intersecting with your new company policy. We need to engage in an interactive process to figure this out.
But in this case, the plaintiffs allege that pulling the alarm caused the company to turn the fire hoses on them. From a legal and HR standpoint, how did Hasbro actually initially respond to these stated beliefs?
According to the factual allegations in the complaint, Hasbro responded with a highly aggressive level of skepticism and scrutiny. Let's look at the timeline for Jennifer DeAngelis.
Okay.
On October 1st, just about a week after she submitted her detailed religious objection invoking concepts of child sacrifice and severe sin, Hasbro's HR department came back to her and explicitly told her they could not confirm her beliefs were bona fide.
Bona fide, meaning genuine, real, or sincere. That is an incredibly bold posture for an employer to take.
Highly aggressive.
To look at a 10-year veteran employee, a manager, who just poured out her deepest, most intense spiritual convictions on an official form and essentially say, we don't believe you.
It is a highly aggressive initial legal posture. And to verify her sincerity, Hasbro didn't just ask for a clarifying conversation. They demanded that she execute a 2-page sworn affidavit legally attesting to her faith.
An affidavit?
Yes. But the demands escalated from there. They also required her to supply 2 separate character reference letters from people close to her, people in her personal life who could formally, in writing, attest to the sincerity of her religious beliefs to the satisfaction of the corporation.
Okay, that detail just stops me in my tracks. 2 character references. That sounds like the process for applying to an exclusive co-op board, or maybe applying for a high-level government security clearance.
Wait, not an internal HR request.
But here, it's a toy company demanding you prove you are actually a Christian to keep your marketing job. Think about the practical reality of that demand.
It's intense.
You have to go to your pastor or your friends or your family members and say, hey, my employer thinks I'm lying about my core faith to get out of a company policy. Can you please write a formal letter proving to them that my soul is right with God? The sheer chilling effect of that requirement is staggering.
It is an unusual and highly burdensome demand, and it speaks to the incredibly tense, often paranoid environment surrounding corporate vaccine mandates at that specific point in time.
Is it even legal for an employer to ask for that?
Well, from a pure legal perspective, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, does allow an employer to make a limited inquiry if they have a truly objective, factual basis for questioning either the religious nature or the sincerity of a particular belief.
Like if an employee acted against their stated religion previously.
Exactly. If an employee has behaved in ways completely inconsistent with their newly stated belief, an employer might ask questions. However, the EEOC strongly cautions employers against demanding excessive, intrusive, or overly burdensome proof.
Why is that?
Because the verification process itself can easily cross the line into becoming a form of religious harassment or retaliation. If the process of asking for an accommodation is designed to be humiliating or impossible, the employer is violating Title VII.
But DeAngelis went along with it.
She did. Despite the burden, she complied. She secured the affidavit, and she provided the character letter.
So she jumped through the required hoops. But providing that proof didn't seem to de-escalate the situation at all. Now, while these religious exemptions were the primary spark that ignited this entire legal battle, there was a whole other layer of intense vulnerability for both of these women that is extensively detailed in the federal complaint.
Yes, the medical layer.
Exactly. Both women were dealing with severe, life-altering medical conditions. We really need to look at this medical context because it sets the crucial psychological and factual stage for the retaliation claims that follow.
The medical allegations contained within the complaint paint a vivid picture of two employees who were dealing with profound, debilitating physical challenges at the exact moment they were forced to engage in this high-stress, bureaucratic standoff with their employer.
Let's examine Natalie Tomaselli's situation first. The complaint outlines that for over 2 decades, since 2001, she has suffered from a condition called a desmoid tumor.
Right, which is very serious.
For those unfamiliar, this is a type of soft tissue sarcoma. It's a cancer that arises from the fibrous tissue of the body. The legal filings specifically note that major health organizations categorize these tumors as intermediate, locally aggressive cancers that have the capability to grow into and destroy adjacent healthy structures in the body.
And the ongoing medical treatment and the resulting symptoms she manages are severe. The complaint details that over the years she has had to undergo grueling regimens of chemotherapy, hormone therapy, and radiation to manage the tumor.
Right. And as a result of the cancer and the treatments, she experiences significant chronic pain in her hip, her leg, and her spine.
It takes a massive physical toll.
It does. The medication she is forced to take for the pain causes its own set of debilitating side effects, and the combination of the illness itself and the medical interventions results in extreme chronic fatigue, severe sleeplessness, and major mobility issues. It literally impacts her physical ability to walk normally on a daily basis.
That's a lot to deal with while working.
So put yourself in her shoes. When this corporate vaccine mandate suddenly drops, she isn't just objecting on abstract religious grounds. She is physically terrified.
Absolutely.
She formally reported to Hasbro management that given her fragile medical condition and her history of cancer treatments, she was deeply concerned about the lack of long-term testing on the vaccines at that time.
She had legitimate medical anxieties.
She stated she had absolutely no medical assurances that the shot wouldn't severely exacerbate her cancer, trigger a new tumor growth, or interact dangerously with her ongoing chemotherapy and hormone treatments.
Then you have the situation with Jennifer DeAngelis. The complaint states she was actively pregnant during the core incidents in question, but it wasn't a standard routine pregnancy where she was feeling fine.
No, not at all.
She was suffering from severe, recurrent morning sickness, significantly elevated and dangerous high blood pressure, extreme and debilitating fatigue, and severe, blinding migraine headaches.
And the complaint actually clarifies that the high blood pressure, the migraines, and the fatigue were conditions that pre-existed her pregnancy, but were massively and dangerously exacerbated by it. She was in a highly fragile, high-risk physical state.
Right.
Like Tomaselli, DeAngelis points to a lack of long-term scientific data at the time regarding the vaccine's potential impact on pregnant women and unborn babies as a core driving reason alongside her intense faith for refusing the shot. She was seeking an accommodation not just for her religious soul, but for the immediate physical safety and viability of her pregnancy.
Now, this brings us to a fascinating and frankly somewhat counterintuitive procedural twist in how this case developed legally.
Okay, I love procedural twists. Let's hear it.
Because of these severe health issues, both of these women formally alleged disability discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. In their initial lawsuit, they claimed that Hasbro failed to legally accommodate their severe medical conditions and actively discriminated against them based on their physical impairments, separate from the religious issues.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting for the listener. And if you are just skimming the headlines of the case, it can be deeply confusing. We have the First Circuit Court of Appeals document in front of us, and right there, in footnote number 1, the appellate court explicitly states a major fact.
The dismissal.
Yes, the lower district court dismissed all the disability discrimination claims for both plaintiffs early on. And, crucially, when the plaintiffs appealed the case to the higher court, they did not even challenge that dismissal. Those specific ADA disability claims are legally dead and gone.
That's right.
Furthermore, when you read Hasbro's massive defense document, Their answer to the complaint almost every single time the plaintiff's medical issues are brought up in the text, Hasbro's defense lawyers drop a strategic footnote or a caveat saying, "We recognize these medical claims are in the document, but the court already dismissed the ADA claims, so we don't even have to legally respond to these medical allegations anymore."
And that is absolutely correct. From a pure, strict liability standpoint, on the specific standalone charge of disability discrimination under the ADA, Hasbro is completely off the hook.
They don't have to defend it.
Exactly. The plaintiffs essentially abandoned those specific legal causes of action when they decided to focus their appeal entirely on the religious discrimination and retaliation aspects of the case.
So that begs a massive question. If the First Circuit explicitly says the disability claims are dead in the water, and Hasbro's high-priced defense lawyers repeatedly point out that they don't even have to defend against the disability allegations, wait, why are we spending so much time dissecting them? Why does the amended complaint still feature these medical realities so prominently if they can't win a disability claim on them?
It is an excellent question that gets to the very heart of how complex litigation strategy actually works, particularly in the realm of employment law. You have to intellectually separate the specific statutory cause of action in this case, an ADA violation, from the factual human narrative of the case.
Okay, make that separation for me.
While the formal legal claim of disability discrimination didn't survive the procedural gauntlet, the physical and medical facts of what these women were experiencing day to day are absolutely crucial for a judge and eventually a jury to understand the context of the claims that did survive.
Ah, I see.
And the claims that survived and are moving toward trial are religious discrimination and illegal retaliation.
So the severe medical distress is the essential backdrop. It colors the intent and the severity of everything that the company allegedly does next.
Exactly. When you are a plaintiff alleging a hostile work environment or a constructive discharge, which is the legal claim that the company made things so intentionally miserable, you had no logical choice but to quit the underlying vulnerability of the plaintiff matters immensely to the fact finder.
It sets the tone.
A jury is going to view the bureaucratic actions of an HR department very differently if they know they are dealing with an employee actively undergoing cancer treatments or an employee suffering from dangerous pregnancy complications.
Right.
The plaintiffs are utilizing these medical facts to highlight the alleged extreme toxicity and callousness of the environment. They are essentially saying to the court, look how aggressive, unyielding, and targeted the company was being to us, right when we were at our absolute most physically fragile and transparent about our fears.
It paints a narrative picture of a massive corporation acting with alleged ruthless callousness. The argument isn't just that Hasbro politely denied a religious exemption paperwork request. The argument is that Hasbro allegedly launched a calculated campaign of retaliation against a cancer patient and a high-risk pregnant woman.
Exactly.
The medical facts amplify the severity and the perceived cruelty of the retaliation claims.
Precisely. In civil litigation, a plaintiff wants the jury to understand the full human cost and the psychological impact of the defendant's alleged actions. The documented medical realities of Tomaselli and DeAngelis provide the emotional and factual weight to their surviving claims that they were not just mismanaged, but ruthlessly targeted.
Speaking of being ruthlessly targeted, we need to get into the actual timeline of this alleged retaliation, because this is where the story shifts dramatically from a bureaucratic dispute over paperwork and exemptions into what the plaintiffs describe as a targeted, pretextual witch hunt. And in employment law, the timeline of events is everything.
Oh, absolutely. In any retaliation claim, the concept of temporal proximity is king.
Temporal proximity.
Yeah, it simply means the closeness in time between the protected activity, which in this case is legally asking for the religious exemption, and the adverse action, which is the punishment, the discipline, or the firing.
So if they happen back to back.
Exactly. When those two events are right next to each other on the calendar, it is the strongest piece of circumstantial evidence a plaintiff has to prove that one caused the other.
And the temporal proximity in this complaint is staggering. Let's trace it day by day. On October 7th, 2021, Natalie Tomaselli officially submits her formal religious exemption to the vaccination requirement. She pulls the legal fire alarm.
Right.
On October 10th, exactly 3 days later, she attempts to go to work, and she discovers her Hasbro employee security badge has been completely deactivated. She is literally locked out of the office building. She is no longer able to enter the premises or attend any corporate event requiring Hasbro identification.
That is an immediate, severe, and highly unusual escalation by an employer.
Yeah.
A badge deactivation without warning is a drastic step.
It seems like something you do when you fire someone.
Exactly. It is usually a protocol reserved exclusively for employees who have already been formally terminated or who are considered an immediate, dangerous physical security threat to the workplace. To execute a lockout 3 days after an employee submits a protected accommodation request sends a very chilling, very aggressive message.
But the deactivated badge is just the beginning of the cascade. The most striking and, frankly, the most bizarre allegation in this entire complaint involves what we'll call the summer camp investigation.
Yeah, this part is wild.
On October 21st, 2021, precisely 2 weeks after filing her religious exemption, Tomaselli is contacted by Hasbro Human Resources. Now, keep the context in mind. Tomaselli had previously reported what she felt was a toxic work environment and bullying to HR, expecting them to investigate her complaints and protect her.
But instead,
HR calls her to announce they have opened a formal, severe code of conduct investigation against her.
And what was the specific charge that triggered this formal investigation?
The charge from HR was that Tomaselli allegedly failed to wear a mask at a corporate volunteer event where she was helping clean vacant cabins at a summer camp. But here is the critical detail that HR focused on. This was a camp for immunocompromised children,
Which immediately elevates the perceived severity of the alleged infraction in the eyes of the company. HR isn't just framing this as a minor dress code or policy violation. They are framing it as a profound moral failing, suggesting she intentionally put sick children in physical danger.
Exactly. It sounds terrible on its face, but look at the glaring, massive timeline discrepancy that the plaintiffs forcefully point out in their lawsuit. This volunteer camp event took place on June 30th, 2021.
Okay, June 30th.
Yes, but the formal HR investigation is suddenly launched on October 21st. That is a gap of nearly 4 full months.
Wow.
The plaintiffs allege that for 4 entire months, nobody in management mentioned this camp incident. There were no immediate reprimands, there were no casual warnings, there were no coaching sessions, nothing.
Just silence.
Total silence. It was only after they filed their deeply personal religious exemptions to the vaccine mandate in late September and early October that suddenly this 4-month-old, seemingly forgotten incident is resurrected from the ashes and weaponized into a severe, job-threatening code of conduct violation.
And this specific timeline discrepancy is the absolute core of the plaintiff's legal retaliation argument. In employment law, when an employer gives a reason for discipline that the employee believes is a lie or a cover-up, the employee asserts what is called pretext.
Pretext meaning an excuse.
Right. The plaintiffs are arguing that the sudden camp investigation was a complete sham, a pretextual excuse frantically concocted by management to punish them. They are arguing they weren't disciplined for a mask violation in June. They were disciplined for their religious objections in October, and the camp incident was just the most convenient weapon HR could find to disguise the retaliation.
It is the absolute classic fear every employee has. Oh, you're asking for your legal rights. You're making things difficult for us. Let's go dig through your personnel file, look at your behavior over the last 6 months, and see what minor infraction we can find to write you up for and manage you out of the company.
Yes. And from a defense standpoint, a 4-month delay in launching an HR investigation into a safety issue is highly problematic and very difficult for an employer to explain away to a jury.
It just doesn't make sense.
Think about the logical inconsistency. If an employee truly engaged in behavior so egregious and reckless that it actively endangered immunocompromised children, standard HR practice and basic human common sense dictates that the employer would intervene immediately.
Of course.
You don't let a danger to children sit unaddressed for a financial quarter. Waiting 4 months suggests to a fact finder that the company didn't actually care about the camp incident at all, right up until the exact moment they desperately needed a documented reason to discipline these specific employees.
And the cascade of consequences resulting from this delayed, allegedly pretextual investigation is devastating for the plaintiffs' careers. Based entirely on this camp incident, both women receive formal written warnings in their permanent files.
Which is a big deal in corporate.
For Jennifer DeAngelis, who the complaint notes had a spotless, unblemished 9-year record of high performance, the punishment escalates immediately to a final written warning, explicitly threatening her with imminent termination.
A final written warning is a severe tool in corporate management. It is the corporate equivalent of forcing an employee to stand on the edge of a cliff blindfolded. One more misstep, real, perceived, or completely fabricated, and you are fired for cause.
It sounds incredibly stressful.
It is designed to create an atmosphere of immense paranoia, intense scrutiny, and overwhelming stress.
And that intentionally manufactured stress takes its toll. The complaint details that the workplace situation became so toxic, so hostile, and so overwhelmingly stressful, especially when combined with their severe underlying health issues, that both women were forced to take extended medical leaves of absence just to physically and mentally cope.
Right. They had to step away.
Tomaselli goes on medical leave on November 2nd, stating she is completely overwhelmed by the anxiety of the retaliation and the physical toll of her ongoing cancer treatments.
But the critical part of their legal claim is that the alleged retaliation doesn't simply pause just because they are on protected medical leave. The complaint alleges a pattern of ongoing, pervasive, and systemic harassment that continues while they are out.
Right. They allege that while they were on leave, their highly confidential medical information, specifically the sensitive fact that they were unvaccinated and out on stress-related medical leave, was intentionally leaked and disseminated to their coworkers and subordinates without any authorization.
That's a huge privacy breach, if true.
Furthermore, Tomaselli discovers that while she is fighting her illness on leave, she is actively and systematically removed from internal company organizational charts. She notes that other employees who were on various leaves of absence were kept on the charts, but her name was scrubbed. It's as if the company is systematically erasing her existence from the department.
Furthermore, when she attempts to inquire about her career trajectory, she is explicitly told by management that because of this sudden, allegedly pretextual final written warning stemming from the camp incident, she is now formally ineligible for any promotions or advancements until she can, quote, demonstrate that she could act with integrity.
Oh.
They are weaponizing the delayed warning to permanently stunt and freeze her career trajectory at the company.
And the situation devolves even further when they attempt to return to the workplace. DeAngelis returns from her grueling pregnancy and medical leave, expecting to resume her duties, only to discover that the company has actively filled her position with a new hire.
Just replaced her.
She has effectively been replaced while she was recovering. Tomaselli attempts to return to work in June 2022, and her direct supervisor actually expresses shock that she came back, telling her multiple times on her first day that she had absolutely no idea Tomaselli was returning.
That's so unwelcoming.
Then Tomaselli is immediately hit with impossible set-up-to-fail tasks. For example, she is given a mere 1 week's notice to plan and attend an out-of-state corporate conference that strictly requires attendees to have full COVID-19 vaccination, a medical and religious status the company intimately knows she does not possess and has been fighting them over for nearly a year.
From a legal perspective, what you were describing is a textbook, classic description of a hostile work environment designed to systematically force an unwanted employee out the door. By removing them from charts, replacing them on leave, and assigning impossible tasks, management is allegedly setting them up to fail so they can be fired for performance, completely separate from the vaccine issue.
And to top it all off, Tomaselli is informed that all of her vacation requests, her sick days, and her general time off are now being strictly and aggressively tracked by management. For years, the complaint notes, because of the grueling, irregular hours her brand publicity team worked, days off were flexible and largely untracked as a professional courtesy. Suddenly, she is under a microscopic level of surveillance.
All of these continuous aggressive actions, the microscopic tracking, the impossible assignments, the leaked medical data, the removal from org charts, the delayed final warnings, they don't just exist in a vacuum. Legally, they accumulate into a powerful legal concept known as constructive discharge.
If you have never heard the term constructive discharge, it is the ultimate inevitable outcome of this alleged retaliation timeline. On August 22nd, 2022, after enduring this for months, both Tomaselli and DeAngelis officially submit their resignations to Hasbro. But they aren't just quitting to find better jobs, they're claiming they were constructively discharged.
Right. Constructive discharge, or constructive termination, is a legal doctrine that recognizes that sometimes an employer doesn't actually say the words, "you are fired." Instead, the employer makes the daily working conditions so profoundly intolerable, so endlessly hostile, and so deeply difficult that any reasonable person in that employee's shoes would feel they had absolutely no choice but to resign to preserve their health and sanity.
So the law treats it like a firing.
Legally speaking, if you can prove a constructive discharge, the court treats your resignation exactly the same as if the company had formally fired you. The plaintiffs are forcefully arguing they didn't voluntarily quit. They were systematically driven out by a relentless, calculated campaign of corporate retaliation.
So we have this incredibly detailed day-by-day chronological list of allegations, a timeline that paints a vivid, disturbing picture of a massive multinational corporation allegedly crushing two sick, vulnerable women simply because they asked for a legally protected religious exemption.
The heavy picture.
It is. But in any federal lawsuit, there are always two sides to the story, and the defense gets to speak. We have to pivot and analyze how a multinational toy giant like Hasbro, armed with top-tier corporate defense attorneys, responds to such a severe, detailed indictment.
This brings us to the second core document in our analysis, Hasbro's official answer to the amended complaint, which they filed in federal court in February 2026. In the architecture of a lawsuit, if the plaintiff's complaint is a series of targeted attacks, the defendant's answer is a complex system of legal circuit breakers designed to shut down liability at every possible juncture.
A system of circuit breakers is a great way to think about it. When you read this document, the sheer volume and repetition of the word denies is almost dizzying. It is a wall of denial. Essentially, Hasbro systematically and categorically denies almost every single substantive allegation of discrimination, retaliation, or hostile work environment. They deny that Tomaselli's and DeAngelis's religious beliefs were the true motivation for any of the adverse actions taken against them. They deny that the workplace environment was ever toxic. They deny that they failed to engage in the accommodation process.
And that is a standard, highly aggressive, and expected defense posture under Rule 8 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. An answer in federal court is not the place where a defendant tells a long, flowing narrative counterstory to win over the public.
It's much more surgical.
It is a surgical, line-by-line response to the plaintiff's complaint. The defense attorney's job is to admit only the absolute undeniable facts, like the specific dates of employment, the existence of the company mandate, or the fact that an email was sent, while strictly and completely denying any legal liability, any malicious intent, or any discriminatory motive.
But there is one crucial, fascinating area where Hasbro doesn't just issue a blanket generic denial. They actually double down on their actions, and that is regarding the infamous summer camp incident.
Right, the mask violation.
Remember, the plaintiffs allege this 4-month-old event was a total pretext, a sham excuse dug up to punish them for their religious views. But in paragraph 32 and 33 of their official answer, Hasbro explicitly admits that they launched the Code of Conduct investigation, and they explicitly admit to issuing the final written warning.
They lean right into it.
Why would they admit to that? Because, according to Hasbro's formal legal filing, the plaintiffs did actively place immunocompromised children at physical risk by blatantly violating the Safety Code of Conduct, and therefore deserved the severe discipline.
This is a critical, calculated, strategic move by Hasbro's legal defense team. By doubling down on the severity of the camp incident, they are legally establishing what is known in employment law as a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason, or an LNDR, for the harsh discipline.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that. How does the burden of proof work here? How does a company's legal defense essentially say, we didn't discriminate against you, but even if you think we did, we had a perfectly legal, justifiable reason to punish you anyway?
Well, in a federal employment discrimination or retaliation case, the courts use a framework called McDonnell Douglas burden shifting.
You are shifting.
Yeah, it's like a tennis match. First, the plaintiff has the burden to serve the ball. They have to make a basic prima facie case that discrimination or retaliation might have happened based on the timeline. If they successfully do that, the burden shifts across the net to the employer.
Okay, and the employer has to return the serve.
The employer must then provide a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason for whatever adverse action they took. By forcefully asserting the LNDR of the camp incident, Hasbro is volleying the ball back. They are saying to the judge, look, we absolutely disciplined them, yes, but it had absolutely nothing to do with their religion, their medical leaves, or the vaccine mandate.
Right.
We disciplined them because they recklessly violated a critical safety protocol around highly vulnerable sick children at a company charity event. That is a fireable offense in any context.
I see. So by doing that, they are trying to surgically sever the timeline. They were trying to argue that the temporal proximity between the October exemption request and the October discipline is just an unfortunate coincidence, not a cause and effect relationship.
Exactly. They are attempting to break the causal link required for a retaliation claim. If a jury ultimately believes that Hasbro management genuinely and honestly disciplined them because of the mask violation at the camp, then the retaliation claim completely collapses, regardless of how suspiciously close the discipline was to the religious exemption filing.
They reframe the whole narrative.
Right. Hasbro is framing this entire ordeal as standard, responsible corporate HR practice. An employee endangered children, so the employee was disciplined. End of story.
But Hasbro's defense strategy doesn't stop at just denying the claims and offering the camp incident as an excuse. The entire back half of their answer document is a dense list of what are called affirmative defenses. If the general denials are the first circuit breaker, these affirmative defenses are a whole secondary panel of breakers designed to shut the lawsuit down, even if the plaintiffs prove some of their facts. Let's walk through these specific affirmative defenses because they show the sheer weight of a corporate legal strategy.
Sure. The first major affirmative defense they formally plead is exactly what we just discussed, that any and all actions taken toward the plaintiffs were based solely on legitimate, non-discriminatory, non-retaliatory reasons, and that Hasbro management acted in good faith at all times without any malice.
Okay, so circuit breaker number one, we did absolutely nothing wrong. What's the next breaker in the panel?
The next major defense they assert is the undue hardship defense. Hasbro argues that to the extent the plaintiffs had bona fide religious beliefs, which, remember, Hasbro explicitly notes in footnotes, they still do not admit to accommodating those specific religious beliefs, would have imposed an unacceptable undue hardship on Hasbro's business operations.
Undue hardship is a massive concept in Title VII law, and it's where a lot of these vaccine cases are won or lost. An employer is legally required to accommodate a sincere religious belief, but only up to a certain point. If the requested accommodation causes an undue hardship to the conduct of the employer's business, the employer can legally say no.
Correct.
How does a massive company like Hasbro legally prove undue hardship in the specific context of a global corporate vaccine mandate?
To prove undue hardship, Hasbro would have to present evidence that allowing unvaccinated employees to interact with their teams, to travel to promotional events, or to access corporate office spaces creates an unacceptable health and safety risk to other employees.
Ah, I see.
They would argue it disrupts vital business continuity, or that it violates local, state, or federal health regulations they are legally bound by. Essentially, they are arguing that the plaintiff's specific request to remain unvaccinated but still perform their highly collaborative public-facing roles in global brand publicity was simply too heavy and dangerous a burden for the company to bear safely and efficiently during a pandemic.
So that's the undue hardship defense. They're saying, even if you are religious, we can't safely accommodate you. What else does Hasbro throw at them in this document?
They assert a defense called failure to mitigate damages. This is a purely financial defense.
How does that work?
Hasbro is essentially arguing that even if a jury finds that the plaintiffs were wronged, and even if they were constructively discharged, the plaintiffs didn't try hard enough to find comparable new jobs after they resigned. Therefore, Hasbro argues, the company shouldn't be held financially responsible for all their lost wages and back pay.
Oh, wow.
They also argue failure to exhaust administrative remedies, which is a procedural defense, suggesting the plaintiffs might not have filed all the incredibly complex prerequisite paperwork with agencies like the EEOC in the exact correct timeframes before filing the federal lawsuit.
It is a comprehensive, multi-front legal war. They are fighting the specific facts. They are fighting the legal causation of the timeline. They are fighting the underlying financial damages, and they are fighting the procedural history. This is exactly what it looks like when a massive corporation flexes its unlimited legal muscle to crush a complaint.
It is the stark reality of civil litigation defense. A corporate defendant must protect itself on all possible fronts simultaneously. By pleading all of these affirmative defenses, Hasbro gives the federal judge, and eventually a jury, multiple different legally sound off-ramps to rule in the company's favor, even if the jury feels sympathy for the plaintiffs.
Which brings us to the absolute climax of this entire saga, because initially, Hasbro's massive, multi-tiered defensive strategy worked flawlessly.
It did.
It worked so well that the lower court, the federal district court, looked at Hasbro's arguments, looked at the complaint, and threw the entire case out. The district court granted Hasbro's motion to dismiss the lawsuit for failure to state a claim.
A dismissal at this specific early stage, a Rule 12b6 motion to dismiss, is a devastating blow. It means the judge looked at the four corners of the plaintiff's complaint and essentially ruled, even if I assume that every single fact you allege in this document is 100% true, it still does not add up to a violation of federal law. You have no legal case, and we are not even going to proceed to discovery.
It's the legal equivalent of being told the game is completely over before you even get to step out of the locker room onto the field. You don't get to request emails. You don't get to depose the HR managers, nothing. But Tomaselli and DeAngelis did not give up.
They fought back.
They appealed this total dismissal to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. They appealed specifically focusing on the dismissal of their Title VII federal and Rhode Island state law religious discrimination and retaliation claims. And this is where the massive plot twist happens.
It is a stunning reversal. The First Circuit Court of Appeals meticulously reviewed the lower district court's decision, and in January 2026, they completely reversed the district court's dismissal of those religious claims.
They threw out the dismissal.
The appellate panel essentially told the lower court judge, you got the law and the facts entirely wrong.
The appellate document is a fascinating read. The First Circuit systematically dismantles the lower court's reasoning point by point. Let's break down the three major reversal points from this decision because they highlight how complex this law is, and they have huge implications for how employers must handle these cases.
The first major glaring error the appeals court found in the lower judge's ruling is what we can call the phantom masking alternative.
Yes. This is perhaps the most shocking part of the ruling to me because it highlights how even highly experienced federal judges can make bizarre fundamental mistakes with the facts of a case. Explain what the district judge did here.
When the lower district court judge wrote the opinion dismissing the case, the judge justified the dismissal by claiming that the entire religious discrimination lawsuit didn't matter anyway. Why? Because, the judge stated, Hasbro actually had an alternative safety policy in place.
What policy?
The judge wrote that Hasbro allowed employees to simply wear masks indoors instead of getting the COVID-19 vaccination. Therefore, the judge reasoned, the plaintiff's requests for complex religious exemptions were ultimately unnecessary because they could have just opted to wear masks to work.
Okay, it sounds like a neat, tidy, logical, legal conclusion. If they could just wear masks instead of getting the shot, there is no forced mandate, and therefore there is no religious discrimination. What is the problem with that logic?
The massive problem, as the appeals court bluntly and somewhat sharply pointed out in footnote 3 of their reversal decision, is that there is absolutely no evidence that this masking alternative ever existed at Hasbro.
Wait, really?
Truly. The appellate judges scoured the record and wrote, we do not see any support for the existence of this alleged alternative to the vaccination requirement in the amended complaint or elsewhere in the record.
So the lower court judge essentially hallucinated a corporate policy that wasn't in any of the legal documents and then used that hallucinated policy to throw out a federal lawsuit.
Exactly. And that violates the core rule of a motion to dismiss. At the motion to dismiss stage, a federal judge is strictly legally confined to analyzing only the facts alleged within the plaintiff's complaint. They must view those facts in the light most favorable to the plaintiff.
They can't just make things up.
Right. They absolutely cannot invent outside facts, assume corporate policies exist, or bring in outside context just to make the case go away. The First Circuit caught this blatant procedural error and struck the reasoning down immediately.
So if the lower court was hallucinating mask policies, how did the appellate court handle the actual real accommodations that Hasbro claimed they offered? This brings us to reversal point number 2, which we can call the mismatched accommodation.
During the appeal, Hasbro's attorneys argued that the lawsuit should remain dismissed because the company did reasonably accommodate the plaintiff's religious requests. Hasbro argued that they permitted both women to work remotely. Therefore, Hasbro claimed they fulfilled all of their legal obligations under Title VII, and the discrimination claim must fail.
But the appeals court looked at the actual requested accommodations in the file and said, hold on a second, that's not what happened.
Right. The appeals court meticulously noted that the accommodation Hasbro claimed it generously provided full permanent remote work was not the actual accommodation the plaintiffs formally asked for in their paperwork.
What did they ask for?
The plaintiffs asked for a hybrid schedule. They asked to work remotely, most of the time, but critically, to be committed to come into the physical office as needed to perform essential collaborative tasks related to brand publicity.
This is a vital legal distinction for anyone who has ever tried to negotiate an HR accommodation for a disability or a religious belief. Getting something that is kind of close to what you asked for doesn't automatically get the company off the legal hook if it still impairs your ability to do your job.
Precisely. And more importantly, for the legal mechanics of the case, the appeals court pointed out that Hasbro developed absolutely no legal argument in their briefs to prove that the plaintiff's actual request of the hybrid schedule was unreasonable or constituted an undue hardship.
Oh, they just gave them a different accommodation.
Hasbro just unilaterally assigned them a different accommodation, full remote, and legally assumed it was sufficient to win the case. The appellate court said that an employer cannot simply substitute their preferred accommodation without proving why the employee's requested accommodation was a hardship. That failure of proof means the case cannot be dismissed before discovery.
Okay, this leads us to reversal point number 3, which I think is the most crucial, sweeping part of the entire appellate holding. This is what we'll call the retaliation loophole.
And this is the specific legal hammer that shatters Hasbro's entire defense strategy at this early stage of the litigation.
Tell me about it.
The appeals court held that even if Hasbro had perfectly, flawlessly accommodated their religious requests, even if they gave Tomaselli and DeAngelis exactly what they wanted regarding the hybrid schedule, that successful accommodation process does not magically erase or legally cure the separate massive allegations of targeted retaliation.
Okay, to put that in perspective, imagine if your company correctly and promptly paid you all the overtime wages that you were legally owed after you filed a complaint. But then, right after handing you the check, your manager walked out into the parking lot and keyed your car for having the audacity to complain in the first place.
Yeah.
Getting the correct legal accommodation on paper doesn't legally cancel out the vindictive, illegal retaliation in practice.
That is exactly the dynamic the court is highlighting. The appellate court is firmly saying that granting an exemption from a vaccine mandate does not give the corporate HR department a free license to then launch a delayed pretextual investigation into a 4-month-old summer camp incident.
Right.
It doesn't give them a license to strip away earned promotions, to leak highly confidential medical data to coworkers, or to intentionally cultivate a hostile work environment designed to drive the employees out. The legal claims of retaliation stand entirely on their own merit, completely independent of how successfully the accommodation process was handled.
The court's exact powerful language in the ruling is that providing an accommodation would not render implausible the amended complaint's separate allegations that Hasbro had actively discriminated against the plaintiffs because of their religious beliefs. You cannot use a granted accommodation as a legal shield to hide subsequent retaliatory abuse.
And before we conclude the legal analysis, there is also a brief but highly important procedural win for the plaintiffs regarding state law that the First Circuit addressed.
Oh, right, the state claims.
The plaintiffs had strategically sued under both federal Title VII law and the Rhode Island State Civil Rights Act. Hasbro's defense team tried to get the state-level claims thrown out on a technicality, arguing to the appeals court that the plaintiffs didn't write a separate, detailed legal brief defending the state laws in their appeal documents.
Essentially trying to win on a formatting error. And how did the First Circuit respond to that attempt?
The court brushed it aside completely. In footnote 2 of the decision, the appellate judges explained that Rhode Island's state employment discrimination law and federal Title VII discrimination law are practically identical in this specific context. The court refers to them as correlative statutory schemes.
Okay, so they operate the same way.
Because there is no relevant substantive legal distinction between how the two laws operate in this scenario, the court ruled that analyzing them together in the brief was perfectly fine. The plaintiffs didn't legally waive their state rights just by formatting their appellate brief a certain way. So the state claims survive right alongside the federal ones, increasing Hasbro's potential liability.
So after dissecting the complaints, the defenses, and the appellate reversal, what is the actual tangible result of this ruling? Where does this lawsuit stand today?
The result is a total, reviving victory for Tomaselli and DeAngelis at the appellate level. Their core claims for religious discrimination and illegal retaliation have been fully resurrected from the dead.
So it goes back to the lower court.
The case is now officially remanded, meaning the appellate court has sent it back down to the lower district court with instructions. It will now proceed toward the dreaded discovery phase.
And discovery is where things get really intense.
This means the plaintiff's lawyers will have the power to issue subpoenas for internal Hasbro emails. They can depose HR managers and vice presidents under oath. They can unearth internal disciplinary documents. And potentially, this entire saga will be laid bare in a very public, very costly trial.
They survived the massive corporate attempt to squash the lawsuit early. The legal game is back on, and the stakes are exponentially higher than ever because now Hasbro has to open up its internal confidential files to the scrutiny of the plaintiff's attorneys.
It's a whole new ballgame.
Let's briefly recap this incredible legal journey. We started with two long-term, highly established managers at a global toy company. A corporate vaccine mandate is introduced. These two women, who are simultaneously dealing with terrifying realities of cancer treatments and a high-risk, complicated pregnancy, submit religious exemptions that are deeply rooted in their intense Christian faith and their theological beliefs about bodily autonomy and fetal cell lines.
And then, instead of a smooth, interactive HR accommodation process, they allege they were met with extreme corporate skepticism.
Exactly. Legally questionable demands for personal character references, and suddenly, a bizarre, formal disciplinary investigation into a 4-month-old volunteer event. They allege this pretextual investigation cascaded into leaked medical data, frozen career promotions, microscopic surveillance, and a work environment so relentlessly toxic they were constructively discharged and forced to resign.
Meanwhile, Hasbro's defense denies everything, pointing to the camp incident as a legitimate safety violation and throwing up a massive wall of affirmative defenses.
A lower court judge buys the corporate defense and throws the case out, citing a masking policy that didn't even exist in reality. But the appeals court steps in, corrects the lower judge's factual hallucinations, firmly points out that granting an accommodation does not excuse subsequent retaliation, and revives the entire lawsuit.
It is a tangled, fascinating web of workplace politics, corporate legal power, deeply personal medical and religious vulnerabilities, and the complex, often unpredictable machinery of the federal court system.
Yeah, it really is.
And stepping back from the specific legal mechanics, this case leaves us with a profound, ongoing question about the evolving nature of the modern workplace. As multinational corporations continue to navigate global crises, implement sweeping public health mandates, and manage complex social issues, the line between enforcing necessary corporate compliance and overstepping into an employee's personal life is becoming increasingly blurred and highly litigated.
That's incredibly well said. As the modern workplace continues to navigate these crises and corporate mandates, at what point do standard HR compliance policies cross the legal and ethical line into policing an employee's fundamental personal, bodily, and religious autonomy? It's a question that federal courts and HR departments everywhere will be wrestling with long after this specific lawsuit against Hasbro is finally resolved.
It's something everyone should be thinking about.
Think back to that opening scenario. You pull the standard HR fire alarm because your deeply held beliefs conflict with a new policy and you genuinely need help. You expect a defined procedure. You expect a professional dialogue. What you absolutely don't expect is a 4-month-old investigation waiting for you and the creeping, terrifying realization that the very people supposed to extinguish the fire have actively decided to turn the hoses on you. It makes you wonder, the next time a major policy changes at your company, how safe is it to actually pull that alarm? Thank you for listening.
If you like the Employee Survival Guide, I'd really encourage you to leave a review. We try really hard to produce information to you that's informative, that's timely, that you can actually use and solve problems on your own and at your employment. So if you like to leave a review anywhere you listen to our podcast, please do so. And leave 5 stars because anything less than 5 is really not as good, right? I'll keep it up. I'll keep the standards up. I'll keep the information flowing at you. If you'd like to send me an email and ask me a question, I'll actually review it and post it on there. You can send it to mcarey@capclaw.com. That's capclaw.com.